Hi, my name's Dave Milson and today we're going to look how to change the bearings on the Rackprobes. Today we're concentrating on the rack drive version, which is the MLD, the MLRD, the LRP and the RLRP. We've got some tips on how to change the bearings and just some easier ways of doing it. So we're going to be changing the bearings that sit inside this housing here. Inside here there's a core with bearings that sit on either end. This is where you're getting some play on the shaft, and this is why you need to change these bearings. So these bearings operate linear movement, which is via the RD91 on the front, which drives the rack and pinion. I'll also show what's in the end here when you remove this drive, so that it's not a mystery for you should have to doing at this end. So I mentioned the bearings will be replacing the ones that sit inside this housing here. These are the ones that control the rack to keep it on position as it travels in and out, so there's no play. You'll start to see play of the bearings again, which is why you need to change them. The first thing we're going to have to do is remove the rotary drive, but just as a tip, I would centre punch the flanges opposite each other and also centre punch these two flanges, and then you know which orientation they come off. So first of all we're going to remove the rotary drive, which is held on by the cap-headed screws here. You need an M3 Allen key for this, so we'll do that first. So with the screws removed, this allows you to remove the rotary drive, which just simply pulls off. Then you can remove your gasket, and you can see on the end here where you've got your pinion that drives on the rack of the shaft, moves in and out, and this is now free to move on the bearings. Now working at the other end, again centre punch the two flanges so you know the orientation it comes off, and remove these screws. With the screws removed, this allows you to pull the rotary drive out now. The gasket's dropped out there, and in here there's a couple of grub screws which need to be removed from this, just loosened, and then this allows you to remove the rotary drive from the end, and this is a drive that gives you a rotation, and this is your shaft that sits inside the extending shaft inside, which you see a bit more of this in a moment. Now working back at the chamber end again, as I say, make sure you've centre punched these two flanges so you know the orientation, remove the screws. So with the screw removed, this now allows you to remove the chamber end, and then you can remove the shaft from the top tube, remove the gasket, so you have your three items now separated. So now we have just the housing here. What we're going to do is show you how to remove the inner core. And the inner core is just held on by these three screws which are at the front of the drive. So we'll just undo these. I've pre-loosened these, and this will allow the core to drop, and then you can lift this off from the core, pull the core out, and note the orientation of the core as it comes out. You notice this is cut out on the core. That must be aligned in this orientation when it goes back in. This is because this cutout allows the pinion to pass through to drive the rack. So now you can actually see the bearings on the end. The bearings are held in by a pin and a grub screw which actually clamps it down. One of these, you may note, these are pins, and this one's actually got a screw head on it, because this one is a cam, and this one you can adjust the cam to give pressure on this bearing onto the rack, because on the rack you would notice there's a flat, so this flat goes against the adjuster. So when you refit this, you must make sure that this is the correct way round you fit it, or else it will be off centre. So with the bearings changed now, when you put it back together again, make sure it's in this orientation. Make sure you adjust the cam on the rack and tried the full length of the rack, there's no high spots, and adjust accordingly. Then you can actually place this back inside the housing, as I say, making sure that it's in this orientation. Once it sits in, just confirm it's in the right orientation. You can see the screw holes align with the holes in the body. Then you can drop the screws in and tighten the screws. And that's your first part of the assembly. Next part of the assembly is to assemble the rack. As I say, make sure that you put this in the correct orientation. When the rack goes in, this will be on the adjuster, and you notice that the rack is in line with the port where the rotary drive would go. So that's your first part of the assembly. So the next part is to assemble the outer tube. So just tip this, let the shaft drop all the way in, put a gasket on, and then align this with the centre punches that you've already made for the first part, and put the bolts in for the flange. So a little tip here, don't do these up at this point. What you need to do is go to this end and get an Allen key, and then you can grab hold of the shaft that's inside and pull it out. You can fit a new gasket to your rotary drive, and then fit the rotary drive to the shaft, and then fit the drive to the flange, noting the orientation of the centre punch that you've already used. So with the rotary drive done up, you now move to this end and you do these screws up. But when you do these screws up, just keep checking the shaft is moving in and out smoothly with inside. You can see here it's got a bit of a notch on this at the moment. You can see here the flange is more open on this side than this side. So when you do it up, make sure the flange is done up evenly, but keep moving the shaft in and out all the time you're doing this. You may find that the two faces are not actually face to face, and you may have a small gap on one side. Once that is fitted, the next item is your rotary drive and a new gasket, and then this will fit into the assembly here. You fit your screws and you do the same process as you do here. As you do this up, make sure you check that the gear is not actually too tight, the teeth are binding on the rack, or too far away. By that I mean you've got play. So again, adjust these up carefully, moving this in and out, feeling the rotary drive. Again, these two flanges may not absolutely be parallel when they're completely tight. Well, I hope you found that video interesting. This gives you a better idea of what's going on inside one of these probes. If you're doing the MLD or the MRD version, then that's much easier because there's no rotary drives on those, it's just a magnet housed in the back. If you found this video interesting, please subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching.